Hi friends, so today I'm going to discuss postdoc situations in European Union versus US. So we are going to look at these two big places where you can essentially go for postdoc and how they compare. So frequently it happens that somebody either wants to decide on whether to try for postdoc in US or they should try for postdoc in one of the several European Union countries. So let's look at some of these aspects. So the number one issue is of course funding. So what you will see is that most of the European Union countries, they have some kind of government fellowships which are out there for people to do postdocs. So essentially it's taken for granted in these countries that normally the industry is not going to fund too many positions for postdoc, and therefore the government has to pitch in into this role to help research and development. So you are going to find a large number of fellowships in European Union countries, and these fellowships are not only going to be open to people in the home country but also people throughout the European Union and in many cases throughout the world also. For example, you can think about the Humboldt Fellowship, the Marie Curie Fellowship, the DAAD Fellowship, and Swiss National Foundation Fellowship, and so many more such fellowships. Now in contrast, when you look in US, you will find that it's more or less a country where PhDs do most of the research. So essentially the whole system is structured on research grants such that the PhD students do the research, and it's rarely the case that there are functions where postdoctoral candidates do the research. So there are some exceptions, like in the biology side and in the health side. So there are a number of postdocs which are funded by the National Institute of Health and so on. But outside of health sciences, it is hard to talk of situations where there are a plethora of postdocs out there. The postdocs are typically funded by grants which PIs write. PIs are typically the professors, and these people will write a grant to an institution such as the National Institute of Health, and they will request money which will essentially fund the postdoctoral person. So one of the problems with this grant based approach is that you always need to be on the lookout for new grants. So very often it will happen that you go to a place for postdoc, and after a year you may have to write your own grants with the supervisor to get your next year of funding. So this does put in a lot of stress on the postdoctoral candidate because he or she may have to be responsible for their own funding, and funding is very competitive and often hard to get. There is a shrinking pie in terms of money. Now let's look at the second issue, and that is work-life balance. So I would say that work-life balance is much better in European Union compared to US. Generally in US it is felt that work should be a very large portion of your life, and this philosophy primarily comes from the Protestant work ethic. And so what happens is that in many American labs, people work all the time. They work during the weekends, they work during night, and so on. Now in European Union countries, this is often not the case. So I know from personal experience in places like France, they actually shut down the entire building and the lab after 5 p.m. because they want to also conserve the power requirement and so on. So they are very strict about finishing your work between the 8 to 5 slot and then going home. So if you are looking for work-life balance, then the European Union systems may be better because they are kind of semi-socialistic system, whereas US is a very capitalistic, or I should say a late-day capitalism system. Now the next issue is of growth. So if we look at the growth prospects for a postdoc, essentially in the US there is a possibility of the postdoc applying for a green card. In fact, it's one of the easiest things for a postdoc to apply for a green card because there is a particular visa status known as the EB1, and in this postdoctoral candidates will have a good chance, and therefore they can essentially get their green card. They can get a faculty position somewhere in the US, or they can get an industry job. It's relatively easy. However, in the European Union countries, the visa process may be quite difficult. So very often in visas such as what you get for the Humboldt Fellowship and so on. You essentially go to Germany or some other country, you work for a period of time, and then you are expected to go back to your home country. So European Union postdocs are actually better for people who want to work for a period in the European Union country, gain some experience, publish some papers, tour European cities, enjoy the culture and cuisine, and then go back to their home country. In some cases, you may be able to get a path to citizenship in that country, but it's somewhat more difficult in many cases. But nowadays, with declining population, things are changing. So European Union countries are trying to get people to stay within that country. Now, the next issue is, of course, language, and this is something which becomes a problem in case you are trying to stay in a European Union country. So let's look at this in the US system. In the US system, language is not an issue. If you are familiar with the English language, then you can manage in US all the time. That's the only language you need. So that's certainly an advantage for anybody who speaks the English language well, and thanks to the colonialism of the British Empire, a large number of countries around the world speak the English language. Now, in Europe, it's very hard if you are in one of the countries where the language is actually very difficult. For example, if you land in Finland or Hungary for that matter, the language of these countries is extremely difficult. Even some other languages like Greek or Spanish or Norwegian is such that it's quite hard to learn, and therefore it's hard to actually become a member of the society and the populace at large in these countries unless you are familiar with these languages. So that's something to keep in mind, that while most of the scholarly work is conducted in the English language, the necessity to be part of the local culture would require you to know the local language. Now, the next issue is diversity. So I would say US scores very high in diversity. In fact, most US labs are almost like the United Nations. They have representation from around the world. So it's not surprising in a lab to find students from Canada, Korea, Brazil, Romania, Nigeria, and many other countries. So you are going to find a veritable United Nations in most US labs and US universities. So certainly diversity is very good in the US system. Now, diversity is better in Europe every day, but what happens is that it's still less diverse. It's diverse in terms of having people from different European countries. So when I was in UK for some work, then what I saw is there were a number of people from around Europe. So there are people from Greece, from the Czech Republic, from Poland, and so on. But you don't have a large number of international students or certainly international faculty in many of the countries. The situation is different in United Kingdom, but in the remaining countries it's not so, and United Kingdom actually is not even a part of the European Union, I think. So keep that in mind. Now, in terms of the mindset of the supervisor, I would say the US supervisors are very open in their thinking. They are very much open in letting you have all the independence you need to do research. So they will allow you to do all kind of things as long as the research is doing well, it's going well, they are not going to trouble you at all. The European system, that is more of a dependency. Whatever you have proposed in your proposal becomes very paramount, and essentially you need to stick to it. Largely your PhD supervisor is going to leave you to your own. As long as you are doing some work, producing a paper every now and then, they are going to be satisfied with it. Now, the flip side about the US system is that it is expected that you be focused on writing grants. So essentially, while the PI may shield you from grant writing in the first year, after that it is expected that you will be part of the grant writing process and you will bring some money to the lab. So essentially in US you have to pay your salary after some time. Now, cost of living. So I would say cost of living wise, US has become very expensive, but it depends on where you stay, and the same can be said about Europe. Europe is also relatively expensive. But the interesting thing about Europe is there are a lot of possibilities of getting places to stay in guest houses and also take use of public transport systems and generally places have a lower level of crime in many situations. However, in US you will need a car, you are going to need some kind of vehicle to go around from point A to point B. In the US it's very hard to get good public transportation, and also the rents have been skyrocketing over the last few years. So what is there is that it's very hard to actually make ends meet in the postdoc salary in US. On top of that, the salaries are taxed also. So you need to look at it, the fellowship you are getting in the European Union, is it taxed or not? So there are some countries which tax it, some fellowships are not taxed, like the Humboldt postdoc is not taxed. So that's something you need to keep in mind when you are comparing these two things. And then let's talk about healthcare. Healthcare costs in US are very high, and health insurance is very much required in US. So that's something to keep in mind. In European systems, generally there is some kind of national healthcare system. So these countries are more socialist, and so therefore you may have some package or policy which takes care of your health care. So again, do a lot of research before going to any of these places. If you are taking your family, this particularly becomes important because you will have a substantial amount of healthcare expenses. Now, finally, I would say that if we look at all these factors, the decision to go to EU or to US for a postdoc is a very personal one. You need to look at these various factors and then decide. If you are planning to migrate and settle, then probably US may be a better place. If, however, you are planning to go for a few years, do your postdoc and return to your home country, then the European Union may be a better place to go. And of course, if you are somebody staying within the European Union, I will suggest to you that you always try to do a postdoc in a country which is not your home country. So if you are French, try to go to Germany. If you are Finnish, try to go to Greek. Maybe you can benefit from the better weather there. If you are Greek, try to go to Finland. So this is going to certainly help you become more global, and I will recommend the same thing for people who are in the US, is that don't stay in your home state. If you are in Connecticut, try to have a taste of Texas, and vice versa. So that was my take today on postdoc in the European Union versus US. I hope you benefited from this video. Stay tuned to my channel, and I will see you sometime soon. See you then.